Welcome, everybody. This is a special meeting of the Mason County Commission for June 1st to speak and talk about jail needs study. Here for the county, we have Kevin. We have Commissioner Schutte. We have Commissioner Trask, Randy Netherland. We also have Frank Pinter, Kevin Hansen. What do I have? Diane Zorn, but it's not her. I saw Travis on here a minute ago.
He's still there.
I seem to have lost him, but okay, he's still there. So with that being said, that's introductions. Is there anybody else from the county that is on here? Could you please unmute yourself and let yourself be known? Hearing no more from the county. Bill, could you introduce yours, please?
You bet. So Bill Valdez, principal in charge from K&B Architects. So we are the lead consultant working on the needs study. And then with me, I have Sherry O'Brien, also a partner at K&B Architects, and Brian Belay, an associate architect at K&B Architects.
Commissioner, we also have two people from the city.
Jeff Nitton is on. Jeff, would you please unmute and introduce who you have from the city?
Absolutely. Jeff Knighton here, city manager for the city of Shelton, and joining us today is Chief Beeson with Shelton PD.
Thank you very much. Okay, now that we're through with introductions, if you want to go ahead, Bill, and go on to the next item on our agenda.
Will do. So let me share my screen. And so hopefully everyone can see. All right. So just quick agenda. So we'll go through some site and some rough cost associations with regard to the different sites that we've been able to pull together based off of some general assumptions that we've made about them. And then we wanted to go back and kind of talk a little bit more about some of the concept design plans. So some site organization, some updated information in more detail with regard to housing floor plans, and really be able to get some hopefully feedback from the jail folks about operations and what's going to work better or not. Talk a little bit more about the existing site and explore some concepts with regard to kind of phased development, I guess, of that site. And hopefully be able to have an open conversation just about preferences based off of some of the information that we showed last week, as well as the information that we'll be end up showing today. So ultimately, that's what we'd like to be able to get to, and then wrap up and then plan for our next steps. And our next meeting, which is scheduled for later in June the 21st currently. So at that meeting, that's why we're going to ask for some preferences. We'd really want to drill in and be presenting more preferred options and not be carrying kind of all of the different sites and options that we're currently evaluating. So with that, I will kind of change over and we'll talk just briefly about the sites and some about the costs. So this is the similar information that we showed at the last couple of meetings. So we have our site 00, which is the existing site in the middle of the city. We have site 01 out here at the intersection of 102 and 101. And then site 02, which is the Ellis Hills, which is a little bit further removed, a little bit west of Highway 101, are the three sites that we evaluated and are still continuing to analyze. On site 01, what we're looking at here is kind of the template floor plan, site plan that we showed at the last meeting, and just how it's roughly takes up one of the 6 lots that are available, but most likely we're going to end up having to use about a lot and a half to actually make parking, site circulation, everything else work. But for the most part, it works pretty well, and then would preserve the balance of the lots, which more are with highway frontage would be available for future development or future uses by the county. The site O2, again, this is fairly removed from everything. It's a large existing forested site. As you can see, we're only going to take up about 1/10 of the existing site to be able to locate the building and have plenty of access around with regard to parking and pedestrian as well as vehicular access in and around from the parking lots and to the sally ports around it. So we have plenty of room to be able to locate it. Both of the sites are fairly flat, so fairly simple from a development standpoint. So ultimately what that kind of got to us was wanting to be able to analyze, really, is there a development or a cost difference between the two? Knowing that site O2 is a little bit further, so there's a little bit more travel associated with it. And so really looking at development costs and and see if there was really a difference. So essentially what we did is we analyzed this from a spreadsheet, and we talked with both KPFF, our civil engineering consultant, as well as JMB Consulting Group, who is our cost consultant. And we wanted to really understand those site utilities that would be needed to develop both of these new sites, and really start to analyze them to be able to compare between the existing site and these other two new development sites. So ultimately what came out of the discussion was based off what we think the water demand probably would be to any one of the sites if we were to extend water service both for fire as well as domestic water. It'd be about $1.1 million per mile to be able to extend that service out to the sites. If we're wanting to do the exact same thing for tying into the city's sanitary sewer system, that would be about $3.4 million per mile to be able to extend the sewer system to be able to accommodate a 240-bed jail and the domestic sewer that would be demand that would be developed from that. Then we also looked at domestic and fire water, developing a well. So this would be more in line with for site O2. If the water line was going to be so far away that really wasn't reasonable to be able to extend there, and we'd go to more of a well system and a storage tank system, that'd be about $800,000 to be able to develop a well and a storage tank to be able to support both domestic water as well as fire water on the site. And then if we end up looking at wanting to develop as a sanitary sewer septic field, which was actually talked about a little bit by KPFF, Alberto, when he was on last week's call, that would be essentially kind of creating a very large leach field rather than extending sanitary sewer service to the site. That'd be about $5.5 million to be able to accommodate the sewer demand that would be developed by this facility. Then also we wanted to be able to look at what's the cost for on-site parking. And so this would be to be able to, grade, be able to put the underlayers as well as the asphalt toppings and developments for on-site parking. And that's about $15,000 per parking stall. And that would include the stalls as well as the circulation drives and anything else that we need to be able to accommodate the parking that we talked about at the last meeting, which was about 46 stalls between county vehicles, staff vehicles, and visiting stalls. So again, based off of some of the conversations that we had with Jeff in the city at last week's call, obviously there's already water service, there's sanitary sewer service, there's power in the area. And there's the possibility of using and analyzing as a kind of a district-wide or a campus-wide parking plan. Obviously, there'd have to be additional discussions on that, but essentially we would not need to be able to do really any of this for the existing sites. So that's why in the total column here, it's all zeroed out. Everything is there. There will obviously have to be additional tap fees and the like based off of whatever gets developed, but that's going to be applicable to all of these different options. So then when we end up looking at site 01, it is fairly close. We talked a little bit with Jeff about its proximity to the new sanitary sewer plant. And that's about 1.88 miles. And again, not really quite sure exactly where we're tying in and where we're extending it to, but a little less than 2 miles to be able to get from our site all the way to the existing, the new plant. And at 3.8 million a mile, you know, essentially that gets us about $6.4 million to be able to extend that service. And then the same with water. Water, we're a lot closer. And so it's about 0.3 miles to extend out to our site. So a little over $300,000 to be able to get domestic water and fire water to our site to be able to accommodate. Obviously, these are zeroed out because we're going with more with public services rather than developing on-site utility services. But we still would need, you know, the full 46 parking stalls on the site, which would be about $690,000. So roughly to develop at the site 01 for utilities as well as for site parking would be about just under $7.5 million to be able to develop the site. Then when we end up looking at, oops, sorry, I did not change this. This should be site 02. Again, this would be more of not tying into the sewer system and the water system that we'd be developing our own utilities on the site. So that's where those costs are going across. We'd still have the on-site parking demand and need that would have to occur there. And it's just under 7 million. So actually, in reality, the development of both of these sites are pretty close. They're about $500,000 apart based off of the assumptions that we looked at, based off of utility needs, utility sizes, and anticipated distances for extending those services there. Obviously, being on public utilities has a level of consistency that the site 01 would probably have some benefits to versus having all site-specific developed services and utilities being developed for site 02. While it's a little bit cheaper, as from an initial development cost, there's obviously going to be a lot more ongoing maintenance costs. There would be the burden of the county for this methodology of providing water and sewer service that you would not have associated with the public utility provided. So we just wanted to kind of look at that and kind of share that with regard to costs. And before we kind of moved on, wanted to see, was there any questions with regard to how we looked at this or with regard to any of the numbers that we kind of presented? Okay. So then that was that with regard to the sites. We did, and we presented this option last week, which was kind of just a larger kind of bubble diagram of the different spaces and adjacencies and relationships to each other with regard to the different departments. But essentially, it'd all be built kind of around housing, which would be located kind of in the middle of the building, with alternative housing shifted to the side, with alternative sentencing, the public lobby, all having access to the public parking lots or the public side of access. And then we would have a staff entry point that would bring staff directly into staff support, and even possibly have direct access through that into jail administration for those functions. What we wanted to be able to showcase were some of these shared spaces and why they are kind of linking these other spaces together. So there's the shared conference room and classroom within alternative sentencing that was actually going to be used as a conference room for jail administration. So we wanted this connection here. And then we had the large multi-purpose room, which was actually being used as part of inmate programs as one of the large classrooms that also staffs would be using for their defensive tactics and other trainings would be able to use and access. So we wanted to be able to have a close proximity with regard to staff access point and staff support program spaces. We also knew that there needed to be a link between food service and the staff break room, since food service is provided for staff within the break room. So there would be a preference to be able to have a proximity there. Jail administration needs to have a proximity for the public lobby and visitation, as well as needs to be some interlinks between the court and court support for video court program, as well to the lobby for public to be able to get in, as well as for staff to have access to that, as well as inmate and in custody delivery to that location. So a lot going on with regard to operations here. There was also a desire to be able to have alternative sentencing in close proximity to booking. So we wanted to be able to indicate that that was also a goal to be able to have. And then as far as secured access points, we were indicating off the vehicle sally port and access directly into intake and booking area, as well as a release point from release directly to the sally port, as well as a desire and a preference to be able to have from the vehicle sally port a direct access into health services, so the medical clinic. So if there is an issue that's going on and there needs to be a transport directly to hospital or to some other facility, that could actually occur through the clinic as well. So that was kind of showing just some proximities and really adjacencies and operations that we wanted to be able to kind of capture in how we understood the program and understood some of the conversations with the jail staff. And so we presented a little bit about that last week, got a little bit of comment, but hopefully you've been able to take a little bit closer look at the plans, at these adjacency diagrams. And so hopefully later we can hear any additional feedback that you've been able to develop. So then what we wanted to be able to show here is really how this big purple housing block, actually, how would that possibly be developed? So we actually went through and started working on developing a couple of different plans to be able to accommodate the program that we currently have. So with these first couple of options was really looking at how do we end up developing this in a way that you'd actually be able to have two separate control rooms that would really be able to observe all of your celled housing. And so this was kind of an option, essentially, if you remember touring some other radial planned facilities in the region, like Skagit or SCORE. This essentially is a radial plan, which has housing units arrayed around kind of a central hub with the central control located directly above that hub. And if while at Skagit, there was only one radial plan with one central control. At SCORE, if you toured that facility, there was actually two radial plans with two separate kind of control rooms, kind of overseeing all the different housing within that facility. And so because you're smaller than that facility, essentially this is kind of blending everything together. So essentially what we'd end up having is kind of a half array of housing located in here, kind of a central location that would end up having day rooms, not day rooms, outdoor rec areas. So you'd have your primary outdoor rec, and then 4 smaller outdoor rec areas for your higher custody folks to be able to have proximity within. And then another series of kind of radial plan of day rooms and cells wrapped around. As you can kind of see from here, we have our quad cells located here, and then the rest of the cells are either doubles or single cells for both your blended male and female populations. So this is one way to be able to kind of look at how a housing plan can actually be done. And then essentially this would be just the second level of that, where you'd end up having a control room here that's able to see into the outdoor rec area, as well as into these other day rooms. And then this central control room is able to look into all of these day rooms, as well as your large outdoor rec, and into a couple of your smaller outdoor rec areas. Those control rooms could actually be linked together by a walkway to provide some level of kind of efficiency of those that interlink together. And so that was one option that we looked at. And then this is another one that we started analyzing was, well, what if we take that and we're only going to have one control booth, one central control, which would be, again, here with a radial plan. We'd locate a few additional day rooms kind of around that central hub. We'd essentially split where those day rooms are day rooms and units are connected. Essentially, if I come back to this image, we end up eliminating these walkways or corridors or other use spaces, and we just kind of pull them apart big enough to actually move all of these smaller, more secured outdoor rec areas, and we put them into those connections, which is essentially what you're seeing with these brown blocks here. So anything brown is outdoor rec. Anything that's purple would essentially be day rooms, as well as the cells. Anything that's green is essentially our central shared utilities, like the showers and the bathrooms and the janitorial facilities supporting the units. And then with this option, everything's around the single central control, and then we just end up having 3 units that are shifted off of that, again, off of a main circulation corridor with shared utilities in between 2 of the facilities, 2 of the units, and then 1 off to the side. So essentially we'd have access that would be looping through more in a 90-degree with this option, versus coming back to this option, you would have potential for access of coming, either straight through or some access coming from the side into this kind of central circulation areas underneath central control. Let's see. And then these were just some other alternatives with regard to how those could possibly get laid out. So I get first things first, Kevin. Was there kind of an assumption or a preference with regard to having one singular control room, central control room, or a preference to ultimately have multiple to be able to view directly into each one of the units?
So for efficiency's sake, obviously if you have 2 control rooms, that's another FTE, well, another 4.6 FTEs to man it. And then the other thing was the difference between these two was the access to the rec yards. It looks like on your first plan, you would have to come out of the day room and into a corridor and then into the rec yard. So it's going to involve staff transport to get them in and out. It looks like on the second plan, we could have maybe direct access to most of those yards from the day rooms, and which would not involve staff having to escort inmates in and out of the rec yards. So I'm looking at staff resource. So the second one seems to make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. Essentially, what we would be able to do is, we could kind of pick and choose. But essentially, you'd end up having, especially if we end up saying your higher custodies are here and here. And then, and depending on where we locate, then all your lesser custodies here, and here would be going to your larger day room. And so there will be transport, but essentially your higher custodies would most likely be able to have direct access to those smaller rec rooms, outdoor rec areas.
So for efficiency's sake and staffing's sake, I think the second plan appears to be more efficient.
Yes. Just strictly from an operations standpoint. And again, we'll have to kind of then look at how do we get, where, what are we accessing? What are the benefits in this current plan? Ultimately, we would have probably kind of intake and health services on this end, which ultimately would be coming in here, as we kind of said, health services in your intake. So you have some proximity there. And then this corridor would come out and kick out to visitation and programs, which ultimately would be something, kind of right out in here. So essentially we're creating that circulation, something like this.
Yeah, it looks like it'll work.
Okay. So that's good. And that's very beneficial to kind of have that direction. So then going back to the existing site, which is this. As we kind of talked about last time, we actually showed a couple of different options that essentially we could build on the site and be able to fit the full program on it. And we're pretty much, property line to property line. But we can essentially make it all fit. And we can make it all fit as a single level jail facility, which there's a lot of benefits from an operations standpoint. But obviously you have an existing jail. So there becomes some issues associated with, well, how do we end up kind of making that work? This was kind of the blow up of those two different options. And there's some discussion that we talked about with regard to phasing. So actually what we end up doing is we dropped in. So this is kind of the face of the property line as far as we can kind of build right here. This is the existing jail, is this dark blue line that we have. So essentially in both of these options, if we ended up saying, okay, we're going to leave the existing building in phase one and phase one construction would be this green dashed outlined area. So this would be the area the contractor could build in under phase one, and everything in that area would be built out by the contractor at that time. And then at that point, the contractor would turn the building over. The facility would then be controlled by the county. You'd be able to transition all of your program space as well as all the in custodies out of the jail and into the new jail. And then the existing jail would be demolished and the balance of the jail would be built out, which would be this lighter blue box would be the phase 2 construction zone. So we kind of took those housing array that we kind of showed, that we had a discussion, which essentially kind of fits into this area, as well as the alternative housing here. And here, this is your main housing array, and your alternative housing, which is your dormitories, would be here in this option. And in either one of these, we looked at, okay, what would be the capacity of this phase 1 jail that would be built out? And you'd essentially operate in while your phase 2 is being constructed. In this option, you'd have 146 beds. Essentially, you'd have the full array, which would have all 5 of your housing, of your outdoor rec areas, as well as 7 of your housing units. Celled housing units would be all within this zone. As well as you'd have your inmate programs, you'd have your public lobby, your visiting and video court programs, your staff support, food service, laundry, building systems, maintenance, loading dock, to be able to up and operate. What would not be in this area, you would not have your jail administration. So we'd have to kind of deal with, okay, how are we dealing with staff and those type of spaces, intake and release, the vehicle sally port, health services, and then your alternatives program would be outside, and you'd have to be without it for whatever the duration would be, whether it's 12 months, 16 months duration to kind of build out phase 2. In this option here, where different programs are kind of moved around a little bit again, because we have alternative housing located now within that phase 1 zone, as well as you'd have 4 housing units that within the radial plan would be within that, along with your control station. You'd have about 150 beds. But again, most of that, or a fair amount of that, would actually be in dormitory versus being in cells. But then you'd have your health services, you'd have your intake and release, your jail administration, your inmate, programs, your front lobby. Your video court would have to be done or be delayed in how that's really kind of interface, your staff support, and then all of your really central services for supporting your in custodies with regard to food service, laundry, all that would be built out in phase 2. So this kind of I wanted to be able to kind of show what's in, what's out, what the capacity actually is, and be able to have a dialogue. Is this even something that would be considered? And if it is, what programs would you have to be able to have within phase 1 to be able to really run your jail facility for those that duration while phase 2 construction is actually occurring?
Okay, so alternative sentencing admin we can go remote. Maybe we can get a modular building or something hauled in to the parking lot across the street. We're going to have food services. We're going to have health services. We're going to have laundry and intake and release. Did you get all that quickly?
Health services, intake and release, and laundry, and food service.
Yeah.
Definitely has to occur. And also,
Yeah.
we actually talked a little bit more this morning as a team. Your building systems, no matter what, has to be kind of within phase one. So with this, we
Yeah.
actually had building systems up here. A lot of that's kind of our central plant, our boiler and everything else. So in this option, really, we'd probably have to either displace some stuff down here, or it'd have to go up on the roof with a penthouse, is essentially where we'd end up having all of our building mechanical and water services would actually have to be done. So even these, there'd have to be some massaging. So, so as a confirmation, food service, laundry, intake and release, and health services all have to be part within phase one, no matter what.
Yes.
And then alternatives and alternative sentencing and jail administration can be done
Remote.
remotely. And then
Although, one more thing,
Sure.
Bill, we're going to have video visit, and maybe we could, yeah, we got to have that.
Yep.
And what about visitation?
So as far as, you're going to have video visiting carols within each one of the day rooms, whether they're carols or we end up kind of creating more private booths, which would be more for facilitating remote visiting with professionals, attorneys or a doctor or something like that. And again, I think there is the potential for the public. We could since everything is going to be via internet, that we could actually do and possibly create a kiosk, or for whether it's public or whether it's professional visiting, to occur possibly at another site or in a temporary site, and then link those all back into the housing units that are built in phase one.
So right now we have a video visit is primarily done remotely through the internet, and we could actually move that kiosk out of our lobby into the whatever area that admin and alternative sentencing goes to for public access.
Yeah.
So we provide on-site video visit at no charge for indigent people. So that could go there, but we're still going to have some means for an attorney or Western State Hospital or somebody to come in and conference with the inmates somewhere.
Yeah. And I think, again, we're dealing with kind of hopefully a short duration in the longevity of the building. I think if intake is down, like in this scenario, if intake is down in this area, I think there's a way that you can, because there's going to be some holding rooms, there's going to be some report writing areas, there's going to actually be some other spaces. We can probably put something in there that would allow you to do those type of professional visits within that area, that can get tweaked or literally just reassigned to what the permanent function would be within intake and release.
Yeah, that works.
Do you think inmate programs could be done not in phase one? I'm just asking the question. Obviously some programs can obviously be done and will be done in the day room areas, but not having classrooms and those type of things in phase one. Is that doable?
Well, Bill, we really haven't had any of that since 1985. So what's another year?
What's another year? All right. So I think as we were kind of talking a little bit, because of how programs is kind of linked with all these other kind of functions, I don't know if we can actually get it moved out, but we might. And so we wanted to be able to have this discussion so we could start moving these jigsaw puzzles pieces around and see if we can kind of make it work. But until we asked, we didn't, we can't really make that assumption. And so actually it's not maintenance, it is building systems. We definitely need to be able to have. Okay. You didn't mention a vehicle sally port.
We can do without it.
Okay.
Temporarily. We can always put a chain link up or something, where, up at the front door or intake, something.
Okay. So that's helpful. I think if there's anything else. Oh, so does that roughly 140 to 150 beds? Would that be doable?
Yes.
Obviously, it's more capacity than you currently have. So
Yes.
okay. So it seemed like at last week's call, not everybody was really kind of warm to this idea. So I wanted to kind of ask, is this based off kind of this discussion and thinking more about it? Is this something that we want to continue to analyze and develop further?
As far as jail operations, it looks reasonable to me.
Great.
County commissioners probably have more of a say.
Well, I've been thinking, and I have no choice, I think, but to jump in now. Bill, I really would have appreciated if you would have called me so we could have had some of this conversation offline instead of doing it here, or one of your staff, because I know I've asked several times over and over again. When we had our other building on building 10, you guys were brought in and we ended up designing it without talking to us what we had to work with. And we had to stop doing that because couldn't do $12 or $13 million build. We ended up having to do it ourselves, do it at 3. And that all happens. We're going through the same situation here. And I need to explain some numbers to you. And again, I wish we could have done it offline instead of here. One of the first questions you have to ask if I come and ask you to build a home for me and you talk to the people that are going to live in it, that's fine. But one of the first questions you need to ask when designing a home is, how much can they accurately afford to pay? How much can they afford to pay yearly for a payment? What capacity do they have to be able to do things? And so I need to break down where we're at for you. This money coming out of nowhere, we have to come up with the money to be able to pay for anything you're putting forward. Currently, you put forward a program that at one point is 54 to 66 with contingencies. We're looking at 60 or 70. At 60 or 70 million dollars, this county would have to go out most likely to a bond. If we bonded at 4.25%, we're looking at a yearly payment of 4.5 million. If we bond at 30 years, we may have to pay more than 4.5, but 4.25. But let's go 4.25. We're looking at $3.6 million. Currently, we have only certain funds that we can even pay out of. One of them would be our REIT 2 funds. Okay, that's specifically for projects like this. We currently use approximately about 500 up to $750,000 each year out of that pocket as it is. We're looking to have a banner year this year at a little over 2 million. That's wonderful. So to be able to take the money out of there, the reality of what we actually have to spend out of that on a great year looks like to be closer to about $1.5 million per year. It'd be less than that, of course, when we're having a bad year, unless we don't want to do any of the painting or anything on our buildings anymore. But on a bad year, there may be only $500,000 to $750,000 to use on that. Our 09 funds is another pocket that we could consider for spending to bond and pay for the payments on the bond. Only problem is our 09 is already mostly exhausted. It goes to the Belfair sewer and it goes to the Shelton sewer. We could take it out of general fund, but we all know how that works here for the general fund. We have to start looking at laying people off. So when it comes down to, there's other things that could maybe save money. I know we've had our discussions about taking juvenile, putting it into this. The savings looks to be between $500,000 and $800,000 a year on the up end. That won't even cover the staffing because we're looking at $800,000 to $1.2 million for staffing. My main point that I'm trying to make with this is we're looking at programs that are going to take a minimum expenditure of 3.6 million to 4.5 million each year to pay back. With that, we only have $1.5 million available in room to pay back. And if we were to pass the the tax, the juvenile or the criminal tax, and bring that in. That will pay off each year for up to 6 years. But in order to do it on a 20-year plan, we'd have to repass that 4 times. If we do it on a 30-year plan, we have to repass it 6 times. The reality is that's not going to happen. It's almost impossible to make happen. So with all that being said, we're looking at all this, and I sure wish that we could have had this discussion so I could at least show you the numbers of what we actually have to work with. We've designed all this, which is wonderful design, without the money or ability. And it's not that I don't want to spend it. I don't have it. I don't see it. Maybe the other commissioners at some point we can sit down and we can find more ways to get more money. But currently at this point, those are the pockets that we have. And Frank, if you are out there and want to weigh in and tell me if my numbers are right or wrong, I know I've had some of these conversations with you and bounce these numbers off you. I think they're pretty accurate. But if you want to weigh in, you can. What we can afford is a project that's right around $15 million. So with that being said, Frank, is there any numbers that I said that cause you to have alarm?
No, we do have a limited resource in '09 as well as in REIT 2.
Yeah.
If we did the criminal justice tax, that would bring about $4 to $5 million a year over the 6-year program, and you can re-up it for another 6 years, but it takes another vote, and it's a super majority vote, 60% plus. So no, from that perspective, those are the dollars that are available. And the juvenile, you mentioned is somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000. That's about a fair number to estimate on the conservative side.
So, and just so you know, if we were to do a $60 million, not a $70 million, over the 20 years, the total cost is $85 million. Over 30 years, the total cost is $108 million. And again, we just don't have it. But even if we were to do that justice tax, which would be incredible, it'd have to be redone 4 different times. I'm not sure we could get it the first time. I would love to see us have the money to build this. We need something built. We absolutely do. I'm just hoping that eventually, Bill, you'll give me a call or somebody will, so we could talk about what we could actually do. As we're spending the time doing this, it breaks my heart every meeting, knowing that we're saying all this, but there's no money to do that. So again, I wish we could have had this offline, but that's my 2 cents to put in.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I was kind of wondering where some of the comments came from at the previous meetings from you, because I wasn't quite sure. We haven't really gotten the direction or feedback from Frank, who's acting as kind of our point of contact on this. And again, what we were asked to be able to do was not do a needs analysis based off of a certain construction value. It was, what is the need? And the contract and the scope is literally all developed around that. First, what is the growth and the demographic analysis of both the county as well as the county's criminal justice system and your inmate population and what's expected over the coming 5, 10, 20 years. And then ultimately, what sites would be available to be able to develop, to be able to meet that need. And then ultimately was the cost for developing those needs. So it wasn't developed around or anticipated to be around a certain number, and no number has ever been kind of conveyed to us or to the design team about, oh, well, we have to stay within a certain value to be able to meet the county's funding obligation. It was, what is the need? And then ultimately, what is the size of a facility? And then ultimately, what is the cost of a facility to be able to meet that need? And so, yeah, if we're wanting to be able to shift and pivot and really look at being able to meet and develop a facility that is $15 million in size. And again, I need to know, we need to know, is that $15 million in construction cost or $15 million in overall project cost? Then that's it's definitely a different outcome from this point forward.
And I appreciate that, Bill. And I'm still available to give my 2 cents. I'm just one person, but I'm, as you can see, I do my homework on all this, and I definitely understand and know our numbers, and I know what we have and what we can afford. And it wasn't just guessing. Everything I do, I also bounce off of Frank to make sure. What I would ask again is the same thing I've asked 3-4 different times. I'm more than welcome to talk to you. Please give me a call. Let's talk. I've asked that, 2 weeks ago. I didn't ask last week because 2 weeks ago, all I got was a giant smile from you and then no call. So here I am now. I'm asking you again. I'd be more than happy to share any information that I have with you to be able to help this along, because the truth is I need something for our people here. Our jail, our chief, I understand he needs a lot. We need to find a way to give some type of relief with what we can actually get done. And so I'd appreciate a call anytime.
Sure.
So this is Kevin. I'll just jump in here. So Shooty. So this is super fascinating conversation. Commissioner Netherland, would you be willing to share any of that information here so we're all here and we're all hearing it and able to digest it, or is that?
Yes, absolutely. I thought about how to do that. I was hoping to have the conversation just with them to at least show the numbers. I wasn't trying to force anything through, but after listening again today, I just felt I had to do something. I've had these communications with Frank for weeks and weeks. I'll actually have everything drawn up formally so you can see all the numbers that I have and what I'm working with, so we can all have this discussion. And I think maybe we should have it in a briefing with us.
Definitely.
Hey, let's share real quick. I agree. I think I would love to see the numbers, and because it affects the entire county, how much it's going to cost, whether or not the placement of the site, which one is more beneficial too. So I don't know. I agree. I think that we should do this during a briefing and have the numbers down so that we can all see the numbers, because this is the first I've heard about the numbers. So it would be good to let everybody in the Zoom room know exactly what the numbers that are being mentioned.
I did have a question based off the numbers that you did present with regard to the juvenile facility. If that ends up kind of changing, I had a note that I thought the operations of the existing juvenile facility was running more like 1.6 to 1.8 million a year.
Yes, that's correct. But even if we do change our system, we'll still have to keep them for 24 hours. There'll still be a structure in place. There'll still be an organization in place to handle juvenile, and all that has costs. There'll also be costs involved that will include the moving of these children from one place to another, and other things that we haven't taken into account yet. But remember, we haven't even had this conversation yet with the judges, so I don't want to be too far out there in front. I just throwing it out that if there is a savings, it's not going to be likelihood. It's only going to be this amount.
Okay.
And Frank, he just brought us the numbers here. I think it was last week that showed that that's most likely going to be the realistic numbers that we could work with. But also remember that most likely, because this commission is very good at trying to pay attention to a bow wave, that savings would probably go directly into staffing. That's just my 2 cents. The other commissioners may disagree, but I have a feeling that they think the same way, because they need to have something that they can count on when it comes to staffing. And if the total staffing looked to be 8 to 1.2, most likely this money would go directly into staffing, not into paying off a debt. But we'll see.
And actually, we haven't done an analysis yet of exactly what the staffing plan would be. And I think that is, when we're looking at kind of the big picture, I think that's really, really important. Because some other jurisdictions that we've been involved with, while they might have doubled their capacity, they actually only added, a couple of staff, couple meaning like 3 or 4 staff to be able to double their capacity. And again, it kind of gets down to operations and efficiencies with a new facility versus an existing, if there is some inefficiencies built into the existing facility. I'm not saying that your existing facility is inefficient. In reality, it's very efficient. But I think that might be a worthwhile exercise to kind of move forward in our process, is really looking at that number, about what that would actually be, and be able to have some side conversations with Chief Hansen and his team to kind of really understand, based off of this, what would that be? Because we definitely don't want to go down the path as some other facilities that literally never opened because they could not staff them. That's not what this process should be about. Okay.
This is Kevin again. Just a question. I mean, I want to maybe understand just, first maybe from the commission's perspective, but maybe also from, Bill KMB's perspective. Typically in these conversations, like, we understand the economic impacts, or I guess, we're going to maybe get a little bit more understanding of the economic impacts here going forward. But, I was under the impression that what, was driving this conversation was the population needs, as that, as at least an initial blush at things. I mean, what's the right frame that we should be looking at this, for, if it's something that, I mean, obviously we know what we have now isn't meeting today's needs, and so, what's the proper context then to be looking at the, at this project then? Is it, should we be factoring what the future needs are? Or, I mean, how should we be framing this? I'm a little bit off kilter at the moment.
Right. At least from our perspective, and based off the conversations that have occurred over the last, I guess, 1.5 to 2 years, I have been focused on safety and security. Both that's for community, as well as the inmates that are housed within, as well as the officers within the facility, because there's some safety and security issues associated with the existing, and wanting to be able to rectify that. There's also capacity. The system-wide has had limitations on capacity within the facility and the system as a whole, that has had long-term kind of effects, both on courts as well as on law enforcement, as well as on just how the jail operates. So that was heard loud and clear during our really demographic and programming phase of this project, where we really were looking at the demographics and looking at really all the fine detail of what people were being sentenced with, how long were they there, when were they leaving, what was the risk assessments that were being developed, all of that. So essentially, those were the key drivers in how we were, and the lens that we were looking at was to expand and provide additional capacity within the system to alleviate capacity throughout for the other agencies, whether it's courts or for law enforcement, but always looking through the lens of safety and security. And so essentially that's what the key drivers. There's obviously additional drivers, as kind of came out of this conversation with Chief Hansen, of there's just, providing of programs and some of these alternatives that the county has not been able to really fully implement or fully be able to utilize. within the existing facility and wanting to be able to utilize them as part of a new facility or an expansion to the existing facility. So that's what we had heard and what we had documented through this process. But others that have been involved, like the chief, could probably give their own perspective.
Hey, Bill, I had just a quick question. When we toured the jail, I think it was in Skagit, there were 2 levels of rooms. Is that what is included in here as well?
Yes. So those would be, it was still a single level jail, but did have housing on a mezzanine level. So essentially what we would be looking at with these plans would be, this would be a first level. So everything's at grade. And then there's a series of stairs within each one of the day rooms that provides access to a mezzanine level of additional cells. So this would be the mezzanine level, which the control room would also be at. And that's how we're able to kind of get our quantity of beds and bed count within it. Exactly.
Okay, so if you go back to the one with the central, just one control center.
Oh, yeah.
Would that be basically the same?
That would be the exact same. So this would be just a diagram. We didn't have a chance once we started talking about it to draw it up, but that would be the next step. But essentially, this would all be at grade, and you'd have cells along here and here and here and here, and that within each one of these day rooms there would be another stair that would access a mezzanine level of additional cells and beds off of each one of these. So that's there. Even in this plan, there would be a second level, a mezzanine level, which would be control as well as essentially half of the cell and the bed capacity.
Okay. Can you remind me again, how will this house the same either between 146 to 150?
Yes. So really it's where this would slide up and down within, kind of the phase 1 or phase 2 kind of boundary, that, in either one of those, you would actually be able to get, or any plan that we'd end up doing for housing and housing configuration, we'd probably be able to get about 140 to 150 beds. And that number is going to go up or down depending on really what that mix of beds is going to be. That would be part of phase 1 or part of phase 2, because we have some units that are dorms, some units that are quad cells, some that are single and double cells. So if you end up having all double cells and single cells in phase 1, that number is going to drop and be a little bit lower. If you have, like with this option where we have a lot of dormitories, we pretty much have quad cells and double cells, we're able to be on the higher end of 150. But there's a potential we could be more like 138, 140, depending on really what that bed mix ends up being with the final plan. But we're going to be in that area.
Okay. I worry about putting it here. I love the idea of having a justice complex, so to speak. But I do worry about tearing down the other jail and building the new jail. I worry that the overlapping is going to be a little difficult.
Yes. It definitely will be more disruptive
Right.
and it'll be disruptive to the entire criminal justice system. It's going to be disruptive to law enforcement. It is going to be disruptive to the courts.
Right.
And it's obviously going to be disruptive to the jail operations.
Well, and Chief Hansen would have fun, wouldn't he? That'd be a new adventure.
Yes, it definitely.
I don't know, retirement's looking better all the time, Commissioner.
Yeah, don't go there yet. Thanks, Bill.
You bet. 。
。
Okay. So I will definitely, we'll follow up with um, with Frank, and we'll talk a little bit more just about really kind of budget, finance, and those type of things, and do that probably tomorrow, just to kind of coordinate and get that going. We will reach out to Chief Hansen and schedule a separate time to really start working through a staffing plan, to be able, what a 240 bed facility, what that staffing would actually be, and then be able to do an analysis to really compare staffing and operational costs compared to your existing facility. So at least there's that delta, if there is. That's going to be a known factor to kind of calculate into really the financial options and discussions. And then if you would like us to participate in this other kind of discussion with regard to the finance costs and finance availability that, that the commissioner brought up, we'd be more than willing to. But if it's something that you want to do as just as the commissioners and county staff and have that dialogue, and then you can share it to us via Frank, that's fine as well. So we want to be as helpful as we can, and we don't want to be a kind of a hindrance in your process either.
Personal, I think it's important that you guys are involved in the entire process. That way you have a better idea of our finances and the needs that we need or that we have. So in my opinion, I think it should be a joint conversation, but I'm only one of three, so.
You bet.
Yeah, this is Kevin. I mean, I certainly don't have any issue with the KMB team participating in those conversations. I think, this is what we're, this is why we brought them on. And they, I think it's important that, they at least sit in on it and hear some of those deliberations to factor into their planning, and especially as we round the corner into getting a final draft, of a study.
If I may add to that, Kevin, we will need to understand what the labor impact is going to be on the entire program as well, because obviously that is an integral part. So we would need to have some indication of the staffing level requirements for each of the different scenarios.
Right. And we'll definitely accelerate that discussion with Chief Hansen in that conversation, so we can try to get that more accurately understood for these. And, I agree that probably the existing site will be slightly different from a staffing plan if it's done as this kind of phased option than if it was on a new site, but maybe not, because there will be actually more transport costs and time and staffing with it being outside the downtown core versus being inside potentially. So I think those will be some valuable conversations that we'll have, and we'll definitely try to accelerate and have that occur as quickly as possible.
And Bill, if I may also add, at the outset of this analysis, we had some financial component of your team that had different types of options.
Yep.
That might make sense to bring into the conversation at this point.
It would be. So this would be something associated with really having dialogue with regard to bond versus privatized financing, and really what that would that mean. And but still with privatized financing, you still need to know what is your funding level to be able to pay down that debt, whether it's privatized debt or general obligation debt. But yeah, this would be a good time. I think following these kind of more internal conversations with regard to funding mechanisms, funding streams. And then at that point, yeah, being able to kind of bring them in to have conversations about, okay, what would those other options kind of look like um, based off of, yeah, durations of those financing packages um, um, and the like. So yeah, I think that we're pretty much there.
Yep.
Okay. So that's was the topics that we had and wanted to be able to kind of talk about with regard to this. Um, uh, it's good to be able to get some additional direction and some information from the commissioner. So I think that was very helpful and kind of started that kind of overall dialogue. And kind of like I said, I'll reach out to you, Frank, tomorrow, and we'll start having some of these other kind of conversations about timing and how we want this to actually occur. Do you want us to be able to have kind of conversations with kind of some of the commissioners independently or together? And obviously, we'll be focusing on some of these other aspects of how and the timing of getting PFIC involved and engaged in this conversation about privatized financing, as well as operational costs.
And I'll have some of that information tomorrow.
Perfect.
And Bill, before we adjourn, so the next meeting that we have scheduled for June 21st, that's about in 3 weeks. So that's for preliminary cost models and the preferred option. So we're going to come up with, I guess, more detailed plan of the options, and then John is going to come up with kind of a higher level estimate of each option, right?
Yeah.
Did we kind of narrow down kind of the list of the options that are going to be presented, or which one of these concepts are going to get kind of narrowed down?
Well, I think at least this is, again, me kind of taking kind of what I've heard is that this from a housing plan is kind of the preferred option as far as that goes. As far as on site development on a new site, I haven't heard anything to the contrary that this type of idea with regard to overall planning is acceptable. Chief Hansen, is that correct? Did you have any things that didn't really work here?
No, we like that.
Okay, so we'll really kind of refine those, and when we'll be like Brian indicated, John Bales, what we'll be able to do is really start looking based off of the current construction market and kind of looking out from a timing standpoint as well. Develop really what those what the high level kind of cost models are going to be, and that would be based off of this as well as on the existing site for being able to meet these needs. And at least we'll be able to kind of do a bit of a comparison. I guess the question though becomes, and this might come out of these follow-on conversations with regard to financing and funding, doing something where you're able to really add on to your existing facility. That would be the only way I think that we'd be able to come up with a solution that's able to partially meet needs, but be able to be within some budgetary limit that we kind of talked about previously. And maybe that's something that we should kind of table for now until we've kind of run through this and really understand, okay, if there is a budgetary target that we're needing to be able to hit, Then we can kind of go through an evaluation and a conversation about, okay, what is then the priorities to focus on with regard to need, to be able to, and then develop a solution to be able to meet whatever that revised need is, and be able to hit within that target budget. But I don't think we have enough information at this point to really do much with this, because again, it's not going to align with either one of those, the target budget or the target need. So at least for me, I would say we table this type of conversation until more information is available.
And I would agree with that.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep the June 21st meeting. Again, that might change. The topic might change and the agenda might change based off of these additional meetings and discussions that are going to occur between now and the 21st. And so let's kind of just track and monitor that. And then we can kind of communicate out what we want that meeting on the 21st to focus on, if that works for everybody. Okay.
Okay, is there anything further? Any other comments from anybody in this audience? If so, please unmute. Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion from the commission.
Move we adjourn.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. Hearing no objection, we are adjourned. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.